Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's online talk, which will be starting shortly at 3 p.m. For those of you who are here early, thank you for waiting patiently. While waiting, we would like to share with you a short video from the firm.
I founded the firm in September 1985 with the vision of seeking truth and justice for our clients and not just winning their cases. Over the years, the team has achieved many significant milestones. We are today recognized by the Legal 500, Asia Law Profiles, and Asian Legal Business as a recommended firm in various practice areas. While we have embraced technology to make our services efficient and responsive, we continue to grow on the bedrock of meticulous preparation and hard work, for which there is really no substitute. As legal practice becomes increasingly international, we keep ourselves ahead of the curve with our relationships with lawyers from around the world. Our firm is a founding member of the League of Lawyers, a growing international network of law firms in 20 Asian and European countries.
We believe in partnering with our clients to protect and grow their business. We achieve this by holding firm to our values of integrity and justice, while giving our best to deliver effective and efficient solutions. Instead of just legal services, we focus on developing great working relationships based on understanding and respect.
The firm invests in its team and emphasizes professional development. We are keen to share our knowledge and publish our articles on our website. And we also give back with our corporate social responsibility activities. We cultivate a passion for the law and enjoy what we do. This brings out the best in us for our clients today and tomorrow.
We regularly advise foreign clients, including many Chinese investors, and have a ready appreciation for different ways of doing business. In corporate matters, we offer relevant and commercial solutions, often raising issues that clients may or may not have realized before. In negotiations, we believe in facilitating win-win outcomes.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's online talk entitled Integrity in Sports, the Roles of Sports Associations and Athletes. My name is Naveen Joshua. I'm an associate with Mawing Kwai and Associates, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Before we start today's talk, let me introduce the firm and what we do. Mawing Kwai and Associates is a mid-sized law firm that was founded in 1985 by Dato' Mawing Kwai. Our able team today comprises of 22 lawyers and a support team of 19. Dato' Ma is today a consultant with the firm following his retirement from the Court of Appeal bench in 2015. The firm continues its tradition today of working primarily with SMEs, family businesses, and individuals. We are a full-service law firm with a corporate department, a dispute resolution department, which includes litigation, adjudication, and arbitration, a dedicated employment and industrial relations team, and also a department focused on servicing the needs of individuals and families. Our practice groups indicate some of our focus areas which are supported by talents from both our corporate and dispute resolution teams. Today's talk is a part of our MWKA online talk series. By way of background, we have been organizing monthly lunch talks at our office since 2013, some of which were also broadcasted live. But with the COVID-19 and its resulting MCO, we have moved online in order to continue with our objective of sharing knowledge, raising awareness, and encouraging networking for clients, potential clients, and in-house counsel. Before I continue, please be reminded that this talk does not constitute legal advice. In the event you require specific legal advice to your matter, please contact us for a complimentary legal consultation, details of which will be given at the end of this talk. Before I continue further, allow me to introduce our speaker for the day, Ms. Lesley Lim. Lesley is a partner of the media entertainment and sports team, as well as technology and esports. She was admitted to the Malaysian bar in 2011. In addition to her general civil litigation matters and also drafting of corporate and commercial agreements, Lesley has a strong interest in developing the area of sports law in Malaysia. She was nominated for the Woman Lawyer of the Year law firm category at the 2020 Asian Legal Business ALB Malaysia Law Awards. She was also a key team member of the Sports Law Practice Group at Marwin Kwai and Associates, which won the Sports Law Firm of the Year Award 2018 and 2019 ALB Malaysia Law Awards. Lesley will be speaking on the following talk points: the relevant Malaysian legislation, good governance in sports associations, doping and athletes' rights, and the fair use of technology in sports. We will then, after the session from Lesley, conclude with a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please don't forget to post it in the Q&A chat box provided. With that, I'll pass the floor to Lesley.
Thank you, Naveen, for the very kind introduction. A very good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for choosing to spend your Wednesday afternoon with us. This is actually the first MWK online talk for the year 2022. And I wish very much that we were all gathered in a room together to discuss this topic. I just want to give a big shout out to my ASMC classmates and alumni. I see a couple of you in the room. I see some familiar names as well with friends, and thank you all for your support for today. And I hope to share a couple of points regarding integrity in sports. But before we get started, I think I still see a couple of people coming into the room. Can I invite you to look for the chat box and type over there, and make sure you send it to everyone. In your view, what do you think is integrity in sports? You know, what's the first word or the first phrase that comes to your mind when you think about integrity in sports? I'm just going to leave it for a couple of seconds just to see if we can get those who are already here just to share some of their thoughts on this topic. Integrity in sports. Okay, I see some sending across. Transparency, thank you, Irene. Transparency, honesty. I know we discussed this topic a lot in class as well. We just hang on for a couple of seconds to see if we have any other thoughts in your mind. What do you think is integrity in sports? Before I get started on my slides, very much want to hear from the participants who are here today, and as we wait for a couple more to join us. Honesty, starting to see a team in here. Transparency, accountability. Thank you, Farah. Okay, very interesting. Transparency, honesty. Okay, all right. I will close my chat box now and start sharing my screen. We can get started with my slides. Okay, so as Naveen shared earlier, this will be the four top points that I'll be covering today. But as we usually do with athletes, we always want to try and set some form of target or objective, whether it's something that we want to achieve in a session, in a particular season, or a couple of years down the road in an Olympic cycle. And so here's the objective I've set for myself today, which I hope to be able to persuade all of you in the room here today to be able to see and understand the role and importance of law in maintaining integrity in sport. So that's the objective I've set for myself today. And at the end of the session, feel free to let me know if you feel that we have been able to achieve that. So a lot of the answers that were in the chat box today, when you think about integrity in sports, there's transparency, honesty, accountability. And very often when we talk to people about integrity in sports, it always comes up with things like match fixing. Now it's even come to situation where there's spot fixing, whereby basically you try to fix certain aspects of the game. For example, when exactly a goal is going to be scored, or if something's going to happen at a particular minute, or something's going to happen in the second half. Doping also comes to mind when we talk about integrity in sports. legal, illegal betting, corruption, misuse of insider information. So that's like a general overview of, or those that are commonly thought of when we talk about integrity in sports. And today I want to cover one extra element, which is fair use of technology in sports. See if that, in your mind, relates to integrity in sports as well. And that will be the last point I'll be covering today. And why is integrity so important? What is it that we want to achieve? Fairness in terms of character development, whether it's from the officials or from the athlete side, integrity, credibility, respect, and responsibility. I'll start off with the first recorded Malaysian case, which is this case called Cheong Ah Chow. You'll see the year over here is 1985. And what happened was, in 1983, Mr. Cheong was sitting in a store number 13 in Petaling Street when the police decided to raid the store based on some information that they had. And when the police raided the store, Mr. Cheong was sitting down on a bench and a table, writing on a notepad, and he had 3,310 ringgit in his pocket at that time. And so police charged him. And in the process of it all, after the charge, Mr. Cheong admitted to acting as a bookmaker in relation to the Merdeka football tournament. And just bear in mind, 1985, 1983, this is before football became professional in Malaysia in 1988. And Mr. Cheong decided to plead guilty to the offense. And this was under section 3, 6, sub 3, sub A of the betting ordinance. And he was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment and a fine of 20,000 ringgit. And also the magistrate decided to forfeit the 3,000 ringgit that was found in his pocket when he was arrested by the police. Yeah, and this is just a snapshot of what is section 6 sub 3 sub A. Keep reading number 3 over there. And more importantly, I just wanted to highlight what Justice Chan wrote in his judgment at a point of time. And I'll just read this. He says, the seriousness of the situation caused by bookmakers in relation to sports in this country needs no emphasis and is well known to everyone. Having regard to the prevalence of such offences in this country, the sentence which the learned magistrate passed, just now the sentence that I read out, is well justified, both on the punishment as well as a warning to others who might be tempted to embark on similar enterprises. And again, I just want to highlight the year of this. This is back in 1983, 1985, when the judgment was finally made. So this is one of the first Malaysian cases on bookmarking. And so to bring us back to the objective of today, to hopefully persuade you on the role and the importance of law in sports integrity, I've just broken it down into two major groups. The first one I'll be covering, which is relevant Malaysian legislation, that you see on the box on the left. And then the one on the right is internal regulation, which most of us in the sports industry usually deal with more regularly. The constitution, code of conduct, bylaws, policies, procedures, etc. But I want to touch first on the Malaysian legislation because regardless of whether we are in the sports industry or not, these are some of the acts of parliament that exist in Malaysia that may be relevant and may be applicable to the sports industry as well, as we saw from the first case with Mr. Cheong over there. So here, relevant Malaysian legislation. I've picked out a couple of excerpts from the key legislation, and this is the Betting Act. It says that any person who receives any money or valuable thing in respect of a bet or wager can be guilty of offence, 20,000 ringgit or imprisonment of 5 years. Right, I know there's a lot of words in my slides. Very easy. The important ones I've highlighted in bold, so you can just focus on that. In the Contracts Act as well, it says that agreements by way of wager is void. This is in section 31, and there's an exception in there, which is horse racing. And in the penal code, this is where we deal with criminal cases, and how the penal code is relevant is that if cases are investigated under the penal code, it then makes it possible for the victims to try and seek protection and redress. Okay, so here I've listed now criminal conspiracy as well as cheating under Section 120 and Section 145. Right. Here we have the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission Act 2009, where the term gratification has been defined there quite extensively. We see things like money, donation, gift, loan, etc. Not allowed to give or render employment or render services any payment, any valuable consideration. That's very wide. I'm at sub D now, valuable consideration. The list goes on to any forbearance to demand money, any form of service or favor, any offer of any gratification as well. So very wide definitions of gratification under the MACC Act. And then there's a list of offences and penalties under Part 4 of the Act. Over here, there's a long list of what can be offences, includes things of giving, accepting gratification or intending to deceive, bribery is in there, dealing, using, holding, receiving, concealing any gratification or advantage. We also have the Whistleblower Protection Act in Malaysia, 2010, and it's an act to combat corruption and other wrongdoings by encouraging and facilitating disclosure of improper conduct to protect the persons who are making those disclosures from any detrimental action or for matters to be disclosed to investigation, right? I think this is coming to my last few points under Malaysian legislation. And this tweet was very much spoken about in the news back in October. And it's been a topic of discussion up to today, where our national diver shared about some of her experiences related to sexual harassment. It starts off with this tweet about her experience, and then she goes on to tweet a couple more over here. And it's very interesting. Just note her last tweet here over the end. She says, "We are very lucky that we are being protected safely by our sports association who cares for us." And I think this is really Mandalila acknowledging the role and the importance that sports association plays in issues such as this. And so we have a anti-sexual harassment bill that has been tabled for its first reading in Parliament, I believe at the end of last month. And if passed, it will be known as the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act. And it's an act to provide for a right to redress for any person that has been sexually harassed, the establishment of a tribunal for anti-sexual harassment, promotion and education about matters related to sexual harassment. And there's a definition of sexual harassment in there. I suppose this act has been long awaited. Many have said that this act may only apply in the employment setting, meaning between employer and employee. But if it's defined wide enough, it may be applicable to anyone to use it and rely on it, including athletes and associations. Flowing from that, there's been much talk in the media as well by the current Youth and Sports Minister, who's said that his target is to table the Safe Sport Act before the 15th general election. And we all don't know when that's going to happen, but this is something to look forward to as well, because it's said that the objective is to put an end to sexual harassment and reduce it to a bare minimum. I suppose how that's going to be done remains to be seen, but definitely something to look forward to in terms of Malaysian legislation combating issues related to sexual harassment. Yeah. Okay, and as we delve to the second top point on good governance in sports associations, here's where we're going to jump to the right-hand box, which is the documents or policies or frameworks that we are more used to dealing with within our sports associations or within the sports ecosystem. And the main one I wanted to start highlighting on is the Constitution, because at the core of every sports association, the first point of reference should always be the Constitution. And it's very easy to overlook or forget to check what's written in the Constitution. Very often it lays in abeyance for many years without any review, without any update. And I'd just like to give an example of something that happened in our Malaysian sports industry a couple of months ago, where the president of a sports association was removed or stripped of his presidency by the association because he allegedly siphoned 100,000 from the association's fixed deposit account. And what the members of the association decided to do was to convene an EGM. And through the EGM, they passed a resolution. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, having read this in the news. They passed an EGM and decided to strip the president of his life membership. And regardless of the fact that the president took the monies and managed to actually expand on it and brought back 50,000 from that 100,000 through various investments, that his motive was regardless. But what I wanted to highlight is, what did the member associations do? They convene an EGM and then pass that resolution that led to supposedly the removal of the president. And it was discovered later on, and the sports commissioner came into the picture. And the sports commissioner actually came in to say that the sacking of the president was improper. Going through and convening an EGM and sacking him through that manner was improper. And because going back to the constitution of the association, what ought to have been done is a show cause letter ought to have been issued first. There should have been an investigation. A disciplinary committee, should have deliberated on the investigation findings, made a recommendation, and submit that recommendation to the main committee, who will only then decide what would be the appropriate action to be done. So there's all this list of steps that were listed in the constitution, but unfortunately that wasn't followed. Instead, members jumped straight to an EGM and decided to remove the president. So because the proper procedure was not followed according to the constitution, it actually was announced by the sports commissioner that the EGM was irregular. And therefore, technically, the president is still the president, because if the EGM is irregular, then the sacking of the president is irregular, and therefore the president is technically still the president. So that's one example I wanted to share about the importance of always going back to your association's core document, which is the constitution. And from time to time, it is definitely advisable to have a look at it and see whether any form of review is required of it. Here's another example of a provision that I picked up from an association's constitution, where in the constitution itself, there is a provision to address about sexual harassment. And of late, what we also see now is provisions being included to address a commitment to abide by the World Anti-Doping Code and all the doping regulations that would be applicable. So all that is starting to be entrenched within the constitution itself. Now, flowing from the constitution, just want to highlight the importance of some other documents that relate to associations as well. And this is a case relating two badminton players who went up all the way to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which we call CAS. And you see there in the first box, the charge by BWF was a charge under the BWF Code of Conduct in relation to betting, wagering, and irregular match results 2012 and 2016. So the charge itself flowed from a code of conduct. And then that went on to a hearing held by the BWF panel, and then later we saw the appeal all the way to CAS. Okay, so here's an excerpt from the Court of Arbitration for Sports award. And I'm just going to read out, and it says, "It is important that the period of banning order imposed should act as an effective deterrent to those who might be tempted in the future to act in a similar way." I'll jump to the last one, the last paragraph at the bottom. "The panel finds that a suspension of 20 years and a ban of 15 years is appropriate sanction, is not excessive, and that the decision of the BWF panel should be upheld in its entirety without any modification." So a charge that flowed from a code of conduct went all the way up to Switzerland. And here you find the panel actually announcing and declaring that suspension of 20 years, ban of 15 years is actually an appropriate sanction to emphasize the magnitude of such charges. And here's another example, the Russian doping scandal. You see the first box on the left. It was a matter that actually flowed from the international standard for code of compliance by signatories. So under the WADA code, there are a number of international standards. This is one of them, which is signed by the different signatories. And then that led again to WADA suspending the Russian anti-doping agency. There was issues of them being suspended from competing in the Olympics as well. Subsequent appeal, you see at the far bottom over there is an appeal to CAS. Again, this is just to illustrate of how a matter that is very big, all of us I'm sure have heard about it in the sports industry, that flowed from a code under the doping framework. Again, this concluding remark by CAS, I'll read out the ones in bold, says, "The saga that has followed the exposure of systematic doping practices in Russian sport has considerably damaged the history of Russian sport. The panel has found that despite having an opportunity to come clean and draw a line under this scandal by providing access to the Moscow data, Russian authorities engaged in an extensive manipulation of that data." The last third paragraph in bold, the panel has accordingly imposed consequences to reflect the nature and seriousness of non-compliance and to ensure that the integrity of sport against the scourge of doping is maintained. I'll jump to my third talk point, which is doping and athletes' rights, because doping is one of the key aspects of upholding integrity in sport, maintaining a clean sport for our athletes. And just a general overview, the World Anti-Doping Code 2021 last year had several major amendments which focused predominantly on athletes' rights as well as public health. And the 3 key points I've pulled out over here, it's about promoting the rights and roles of athletes in anti-doping programs, but it's not fair to expect them to know everything. Hence, the second point is that athletes also have a right to receive anti-doping education. And then last of all is the inclusion of recreational athletes, or athletes who may not necessarily be professional and full-time, but they do fall under their national associations and they may compete in national or international competitions. So I'll start off first with athletes' rights. I'll give a very brief overview. And before jumping into the various provisions that might be applicable, I think it's very important to note that athletes have rights. Athletes need to be aware of those rights and that they can exercise those rights. And so what are those rights that we're referring to? They're all contained here in this WADA's Athletes Anti-Doping Rights Act. I'll pick up a few key ones over here. The first one is equality of opportunity, that all athletes should have equal opportunity in their pursuit of sport. Below is that all athletes should be subject to fair testing programs that should be fair across the board. Right? Athletes have a right to medical treatment and protection of their health. And this is where the therapeutic use exemption, I've highlighted there in red, whereby in situations where the athlete has a medical condition, where they are required to perhaps take a prohibited substance or use a prohibited method, that's where they need to apply for TUE. And this falls under this Article 3, and that's a right that an athlete has. And this is the one I wanted to spend a bit of time on. Athletes have right to justice. Right to justice, I mean, the words in bold: right to be heard, right to a fair hearing within a reasonable time by a fair, impartial, operationally independent hearing panel, have a timely reasoned decision, and deserve to also have an explanation for the reasons of decision. And the same rights apply on appeal as well. So previously in the past, most of us might be familiar that usually when there's been an anti-doping rule violation, the hearing is then commenced by the association itself. And a lot of that happens, well, sort of in a private setting behind closed doors. And what that may lead to is certain inconsistencies between the different associations. Each association may conduct their hearing differently. Yeah, but with the new ADAMAS regulations that come into play last year, ADAMAS being the anti-doping agency of Malaysia, will now convene a hearing committee, and then there will be avenues for appeal later on. I've just listed down over here at the bottom who are the parties that can appeal. So this is the right to justice. And if the matter goes up to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, this is a picture that I sourced online of a picture of the Court of Arbitration for Sport. It's in Lausanne, Switzerland. It's a very cute little bungalow over there. But the grievance that we always hear about when it comes to filing an appeal to CAS is that it's a lot of money, time, cost spent to try and bring the matter all the way to Switzerland. And the good news is that not many people are aware of this, is that the Asian International Arbitration Center, right here in Bangunan Sulaiman in Kuala Lumpur, signed a memorandum of understanding with CAS many years ago, whereby CAS hearings can actually be heard here, right in Kuala Lumpur. And that will definitely help to save a whole bulk of time and cost, instead of having to bring the matter all the way to Switzerland. Here's an overview of the CAS jurisdiction. They can either hear arbitration proceedings, whether it's first instance or in appeal, but if there are any further appeals, do take note that that actually lies with the Swiss Federal Tribunal over in Switzerland, notwithstanding even if you hear the hearing here in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. Okay. And when it comes to right of justice, yes, there's all this right to fair hearing, right to access to justice, to have your decisions and everything. The one main hurdle that we find based on the clients that come to us is that parties often overlook deadlines. And by the time the matter comes to us, very often the deadlines have already passed, and it's hard to deal with matters when it's in that sense, you're fighting more battles. And so very importantly, I would like to convey that if ever your association or your athletes are facing with such a situation, always please take into account the deadlines and be aware of it. Okay. This is the anti-doping rule violation number 11, which was added in recently, and it's basically it constitutes an anti-doping rule violation if a person tries to discourage someone else from bringing forth information that may be related to anti-doping. And this relates to another right which athletes have, which is the whistleblower rights. And then over there, you see in bold, an athlete has a right to access anonymous or confidential mechanism to report any potential anti-doping behavior. And so if there's any such instance and you need a safe forum or mechanism to go to, you may refer to ADAMAS, in this instance, Anti-Doping Agency of Malaysia. Okay. Last but not least is this last few. So when the doping control process is going on, athletes have a few rights. They have a right to seek identification from the doping control officer, ask for any additional information, and if they need to pass a urine sample into the cup, they have a right to hydrate if they need to, and etc. so forth over there. Okay. And during the sample collection, if they need to, say, attend a victory ceremony first or fulfill media commitments, all those are rights entrenched within the Athletes Anti-Doping Rights Act. Last but not least is the right to a B sample analysis. Those of us who are familiar with doping, usually when a doping test is being conducted, the A sample will be opened first, and then athletes then have a right to decide if they wish to open their B sample analysis. Okay. Doping itself is a huge topic that we could spend days covering. I've done a very brief overview, but having covered athletes' rights, it's also important to note that with those rights comes responsibilities. And the one main one that I wanted to share, it's a message that we always try to send across, is that an athlete is responsible for what they ingest and what they use. And this flows from the legal principle of strict liability. I've put that in red over the top to emphasize how important this is that an athlete is liable, which means the athlete is legally responsible for committing an anti-doping rule violation, regardless of his or her intent when committing the violation. So very often the situation that comes is an athlete commits an anti-doping rule violation, fails a doping test, and the defense is, I don't know. I don't know what I took. I don't know what's in the supplement. Someone gave it to me. And all those become potentially mitigating factors that we can try to raise to the panel to try and reduce certain sentences, suspension. But way before that, I think it's very, very important for the athlete to really appreciate this responsibility that they have. And the example that I always give is that as an athlete, if you open a bottle of water and you take a sip and you put it down on the table and you turn around and have a conversation with a friend, realistically, you should not turn back around and continue drinking from that bottle of water, because it's really hard to say if someone may have put something to that water, and then down the road, you don't want to be in a situation where you say, oh, I don't know, I didn't know there was anything in that bottle of water. Right. Last top point is on the fair use of technology in sports. And I'd like to bring in the topic of technology because, as you saw from the start, usually when we discuss about the issue of integrity in sports, it's always about match fixing, corruption, doping. But the question I'd like to put forth is technology growing to such an extent where it's potentially challenging the integrity of sports? And particularly where we're looking at sports where marginal gains are always constantly being sought for improvement of performance. I'll give some examples here. So here's the Nike Vaporfly 4%. Might be familiar to some of you you may even own a pair. It's available for purchase on Nike's website. And it all started back in the 2016 Olympic Marathon, where all the 3 male athletes who were on the podium were wearing this particular pair of shoes, Nike Vaporfly 4%. And it's said to improve the running economy. A little bit technical here. I won't go into too much detail. I'm not a scientist or biomechanics myself. But it's supposed to improve the running economy, and how that works, in putting it in layman terms, it reduces the amount of energy that the runner needs to put into during the run. And so if you need to spend less energy running, it means that you can sustain longer or potentially go faster in over a specific distance. And so the shoe has been proven to actually improve running economy by about 4%. The running economy, so that's how the shoe got its name, Vaporfly 4%. And overall, apparently it's been proven that running performance improved easily 2 to 3%. And those are the kind of marginal gains that we're talking about over here. So here, the Vaporfly, you see things like the heel over here on the far right. The picture on the far right is the shoe really broken down in its bits and pieces. And the footwear features things like the thickness of the heel. Okay. With the Vaporfly, the thickness is at 40 millimeters, which is 10 millimeters thicker than other racing shoes. So the thicker the heels, supposedly the more energy saving it is. The material composition of the shoe itself, the weight of the shoe, it's supposedly weighs 50 grams lighter than its other competitors. And even how flexible the shoe is from the heel all the way to the toe. So these are the different kinds of technology that's being put into all the little bits and pieces of the shoe. And from the Vaporfly, later on, we saw things like the Alphafly, and there's a carbon plate right there in the middle of the shoe as well, the dark gray one at the bottom picture over there. And this is, of course, Elliot Kipchoge. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Okay. And so with all these technological advances, what are we seeing in terms of the law aspect? So here, because we're dealing with shoes and athletics, in April 2020, World Athletics decided to set boundaries regarding these advances in technology. And the boundaries that they set was in regards to the shoe construction. Okay, specifically, the sole you see at the bottom here, I've written the sole should be no thicker than 40 millimeters. And I've given a couple of examples over there. So the different Nike shoes over there, 36 millimeter, 31 or 40. And then the Alphafly supposedly had 50 millimeters, but then that would no longer fall within the rules of World Athletics. And in terms of availability, the shoe must be available for purchase for any athlete on the open market, including you and me, for 4 months before it can be used in competition. Of course, availability in market is one thing, complies with the rules, price is a different thing, yeah. Okay. Then subsequently, World Athletics decided to expand on their rules a couple of months down the road. And the rules then decided to expand to govern prototype shoes as well. So there's a definition of development shoes in there, and then gave a little bit of leeway to say that now development shoes can be worn in international competitions, sanctioned competitions. There's a 12-month development period, but you can't use such prototype of development shoes in the World Athletics Series, and you can't use them in the Olympic Games. So here's basically a situation where we see technology being used to try and improve the shoes. And here, the governing body is coming in using law and rules to try and set a little bit of boundaries to work alongside those technological advances. Okay, another example is cycling over here. You see the UCI sticker on the frame of a bicycle. UCI has a approval protocol. And here is just an extract I picked up from their approval protocol website, specifically dealing with equipment. Bicycles and equipments used in competition across different disciplines at the forefront of latest technology. The rules governing the use of equipment aim to ensure both the safety of the riders and the fairness of the competition, while at the same time making the most of the advantages of technological evolution can bring to cycling. I thought that was a great way to describe the relationship between technology as well as the rules that UCI has put in place. A couple of excerpts I've pulled out from the clarification of their technical regulation. They have whole set of regulations covering things like the bicycle frame, the fork, the wheels. Over here is an example of a bicycle that does not comply with UCI regulations. They even have a sample photo over there. Here's a sample photo of covers. Whenever the brake lines, you want to put them closer to the frame or to cover them, what are the approved covers? Here's another example where adhesive tape wanted to be put across the disc wheel, and if there are even regulations governing all that into that detail. The last example, even the height of the socks to be worn by the cyclist, and of course there's others covering the jersey and all that. We can't talk about cycling without looking at this particular bicycle from used by Dato Pocket Rocket Man at the recent Olympics. This bicycle is specially designed, of course, is at the edge, at top of technology when it comes to the track bikes. It had to be available on the market for a specific period of months, according to UCI rules, before Dato could use it at the Olympics. And it's available for purchase. Even you and I can purchase it at a cool 300,000 at the point of time. Not sure how much it costs at this very moment. Maybe more, considering he brought home the bronze medal with it. Okay. Some concluding thoughts. I'm at 3:40, just nice. Okay. I just want to share some of the sports integrity governing bodies that we see. Here's one example from Australia. And what the Australian government has done is they set up a specific body or an agency called Sport Integrity Australia, which provides a single point of contact, single point of reference for all stakeholders in the sports industry to refer to for any matters related to sport integrity. I thought this was quite a good framework over there to have one single point of reference. Over here, and then at the bottom, I just listed down, they even have an Act of Parliament to support, as well as regulations as well. Okay, and tennis is in fact one of the first sport to actually set up a dedicated tennis integrity unit. 2008 back there was their old logo. Recently, they rebranded into International Tennis Integrity Agency. And then with athletics also, we see that athletics was the first sport internationally to delegate complete authority of the management of its integrity programs to an independent body. And this independent body is supposed to be separated from World Athletics and reports to its own board to maintain its independence, basically, and covers a whole list of integrity matters: doping, manipulation, bribery, corruption, harassment, age manipulation, a whole lot. Again, one dedicated unit under one particular sport. Bringing it back a little closer to home here, we have FAM, his integrity unit as well. This is a book that they have. They have a Bahasa version on the left-hand side and an English version on the right-hand side. I got this from their website. There's even a form there that you can fill. And oops, yep, here's just a flyer where they say match fixing is a crime and some of the details for their integrity department. Right, my concluding thoughts. Think over what has been shared over the last half an hour or so is clearly the fact that integrity in sports is a multifaceted issue. Lots of issues, and each one can be dealt with on its own for days. Lots of discussion we can take place on each and every one of that. But with this multifaceted issue, it is our view that a multi-stakeholder approach and a multi-stakeholder cooperation and support from everyone in the sports ecosystem is actually required. So I just come up with this little diagram over here. You see right in the middle is the athlete, one male and one female. I put a globe over there at the bottom to show a global approach, not just a local approach. And very often in our circle, we think of the three main bubbles over there. We think of the government, and we only think of parties like the government, the authorities, the institutions, parents, schools, and the public and private sectors. We can also look to the law enforcement. Just now I shared about MACC's Act. There's the police, MACC, MC as well can come into play. And then the right-hand side is the sports industry, where we have the governing bodies, the association, clubs, officials, and support staff. But not to miss out, in actual fact, we should broaden our horizon, look at the picture as a whole. And everyone has a part to play, and this includes parties such as the fans and the spectators. Media has a huge role to play in this, and of course, sponsors as well. So those are, yes, my concluding thoughts. I think I will stop share here, and I will hand the floor back to Naveen to see if we have any Q&A to address.
Thank you, Lesley. Thank you very much for that very informative talk, and also the proper compartmentalization of all the points. As we go on from here, I don't see any questions for now, but just before we end the session, Lesley, maybe general advice that you would like to give to anyone who would like to associate with the world of sports, or whether it's the business side or even as an athlete, anything you'd like to say?
Wow. So many things to say. I tried to infuse a little bit here and there across. I think,
sure.
I'll just recap some of the key points. I think one of the key examples that I pointed out just now is the importance of the constitution, an association's constitution as a point of reference. And not just the constitution, I think all the other policies, procedures, regularly review them. There are times where they may need to be updated depending on what's happening within the association, within the sports industries. Always no harm every few years. Of course, our recommendation will be every year to actually review these documents, to analyze and see how they are doing, how relevant they may be today. And I think coming back to the points on doping, for the athletes that are in the room, strict liability is a very important principle. Cannot emphasize it enough, that it's very easy to demand that as an athlete, I have rights, but do be reminded that with rights comes responsibilities.
Thank you very much, Lesley. So as we move on, thank you very much for your wonderful insights, Lesley. Before we conclude, I have a few announcements to make.
Sorry, Naveen, there's a question in the chat box.
Oh, so sorry. Hold on, let me just stop on the chat box. Sorry, yeah. With regards to betting in Malaysia, is it allowed or is it legal if a person makes an online bet on a betting site which is registered outside of Malaysia? For you, Lesley?
A bit of a technical question because of the fact that Liana, thanks for your question. You put in there about the betting site being registered outside of Malaysia. So I'll start with the general rule that betting in Malaysia is not allowed, except for there are exceptions. I'm not sure if you were following us at the start. I highlighted several, the Betting Act and even the Contracts Act, where betting is technically not allowed, and the exception under the Contracts Act for horse racing. So that's the general rule in Malaysia, that betting is not allowed. So now comes to your very tricky question, where you say that the betting site is outside of Malaysia. One can try to get away with that, try to navigate, through VPNs, etc., to avoid any form of tracking to show that they're doing the bet from Malaysia. But obviously that's not advisable, because if authorities are able to trace that the bet was somehow done from someone here in Malaysia, notwithstanding the site is outside of Malaysia, because when you use your internet, you'll be able to trace where the user is using the internet from. And so if that trace is becomes traceable by the authorities, then you may be in trouble, because technically that will still mean that the bet arose from within Malaysia. So whether the betting site is registered outside Malaysia, that's a separate thing altogether, because that betting site will need to get their license and their permission from wherever they are registered from. But it's about the person who's making the online bet, where they are. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Liana Umar, for the question, and also Lesley for the explanation. So I'll know now to make sure that I make a proper bet on a proper website. Thank you, Lesley.
Please don't call me if anything happens, Naveen. I have a hard time getting you out of it.
Thank you. Let me just, since there are no further questions, maybe we can end it with some information about our next talk. So before we conclude, I have just a few announcements to make. First, please do join us again for our upcoming talks at the website stated in the slide. For our next talk on 23rd of February 2022, The topic would be dissatisfied with your adjudication decision and what's next. The speakers would be two of our senior associates of the firm, which would be Ms. Hannah Patrick and Ms. Denise Pang. Secondly, please do fill in our feedback form and tell us what you thought of our talk. The link to the form will be posted in the chat. Thirdly, do follow or like our social media accounts as seen in the slide, which you can see in YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and also Facebook. Fourthly, if you would like to speak with our lawyers, we do offer a complimentary 30-minute consultation over the telephone or over video conference. Please fill in the form on our website. As you can see, the link will also be posted in the chat box. To our guests, thank you for joining us. We do hope that you have found today's session to be very informative and also useful. Thank you, everybody, and see you at our next talk.
Thank you, everyone. See you soon, hopefully.
Thank you, Lesley.
Bye. Thanks, Naveen.